Hey guys! Tonight we drift back thousands of years to the banks of the mighty Nile, where the sun rises lazily over mud brick homes and swaying papyrus stalks. You trudge along a narrow dirt path, your sandals crunching on scattered stones, while birds squawk and croak as if commenting on your presence. A faint smell of river mud and freshly baked bread mixes with the smoky tang of early cooking fires. You probably won't survive this if you tried to live exactly like them. Let's be honest. The idea of dodging hippos before breakfast doesn't exactly scream comfort. But tonight, we only walk with your imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to post your location and local time. It's kind of fun knowing where in the world we're all slowing down together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As the sunlight stretches across the river, you notice early Egyptians positioning simple wooden sticks upright in the sand, watching the shadows elongate and shrink. These sticks, often called gnomons in later Greek terminology, are their first tools for measuring the day. You kneel nearby and squint, seeing how a shadow falls differently on the smooth sand than on a slab of limestone. The priests, because of course they are priests, meticulously note each shadow's tip, scribbling marks on pottery shards and small wooden tablets. You can almost hear the scratch of reed pens, and maybe even imagine the occasional frustrated grumble when a strong wind blows the sand away, erasing a day's careful measurement. You notice children wandering past, curious, some poking at the sticks, and a farmer leaning on his staff while timing his morning chores. This method is so straightforward that anyone could replicate it. Yet you can't help thinking that some detail, some subtle angle, must have been sacred. Perhaps that's why even today, historians still argue whether the earliest shadow measurements were purely practical or embedded with ritual significance. One priest, perched on a low stone platform, gestures for the others to adjust a stick slightly toward the riverbank. The shadow of Ra moves differently in the east, he murmurs, and you wonder if he's joking, or if he genuinely believes the sun communicates divine orders through its shadows. As you walk closer, you can see how these early Egyptians were already experimenting with intervals. They don't measure hours in the way we do, but in segments of light and dark, fractions of the day carved from observation. Some shadows move slowly across the sand, marking the gentle passage of morning, while others shrink abruptly, heralding noon's glare. You find yourself placing your hand over a stick, mimicking the shadow, and noticing subtle differences between your own measurement and theirs. A small smile creeps across your face. Humans have always found joy in trying to tame the untamable. The river sparkles under the rising sun, tiny waves catching the light, and your attention is drawn to the distant fields, where workers haul water from the Nile. A group pauses to watch the stick shadows, perhaps more out of habit than understanding, but it grounds the rhythm of their day. Even livestock seems to follow the sun. Goats shift lazily to avoid the harshest glare, while dogs nap in the shadows that these sticks create. You might chuckle at this little choreography, imagining that the cows have their own secret timekeeping system, entirely independent of human observation. Meanwhile, a subtle breeze carries the scent of wet papyrus, and you notice that the shadow tips have begun a slow, almost imperceptible curve along the sand. There's a beauty in this dance of light and shade marking the invisible hand of time itself. You crouch down, tracing the shadow with your finger, imagining the countless generations who did exactly the same, perhaps without realizing that one day, thousands of years later, someone would whisper their story to people far away, in quiet bedrooms. It's easy to see why the Egyptians were captivated. The world is simple, yet precise, chaotic, yet obedient to the sun. You probably don't notice the small fringe details at first, but take a closer look. Some sticks are marked not just in straight lines, but with tiny, intentional scratches that form symbols. An eye here, a tiny ankh there. Some scholars suggest these were magical notations meant to enhance accuracy or curry favor with Ra, the sun god, while others argue they were mere doodles by bored assistants. You lean back, letting your gaze wander over the river's shimmer, considering that even a civilization so obsessed with order couldn't resist a little whimsy in their daily observations. And then there's the human element, the bickering. One priest complains about the shadow on the limestone being lazy compared to the one in the sand. Another insists that yesterday's shadow was too arrogant. You almost laugh, imagining a tiny office politics in 3000 BCE, shadow-driven and sun-fueled. Yet, in these disputes lies innovation. Adjustments are made, sticks are repositioned, and subtle corrections emerge from these playful arguments. Without these tiny quarrels, your own bedtime story might lack the gentle precision that allows us to follow their rhythms tonight. The morning drifts toward midday, and the shadows become the shortest they will be all day, almost disappearing under the stick's slender forms. You notice how everyone, priests, farmers, children, pauses for a moment, aligning with this solar punctuation. A scholar today might debate whether this pause was ritual, practical, or simply instinctual. You, lying back on the warm sand in your imagination, think it might be all three. As your eyes wander over the river, glinting in patterns that almost seem deliberate, you realize that timekeeping is less about strict hours and more about understanding change, anticipation, and rhythm. The early Egyptians, in their simplicity, capture something profound: the art of observing life's subtle shifts. Even a stick and its shadow teaches patience, attentiveness, and wonder. And in this quiet reflection, you feel a gentle relaxation, a precursor to the calm you'll carry into deeper sections of tonight's story. So, with the shadows stretching, curving, and retreating under the sun's steady gaze, you take a slow breath. Let yourself sink into the warmth, into the rhythm of a civilization learning, experimenting, and finding order in something as ephemeral as sunlight on sand. You might even whisper, "Thanks, Ra," just for fun, though you know he probably won't answer. And with that tiny ritual, Section 1 folds neatly into your imagination, setting the stage for the precise, quirky, and oddly human ways that these early timekeepers will guide us through the rest of the day. You step closer to the array of sticks planted in the sand, noticing the subtle differences among them. Some are slender and straight, others carved with faint notches that you squint to decipher. As you trudge through the soft Nile silt, your fingers graze a few of the wooden markers, rough from the sun and water. The early Egyptians, it seems, treated these sticks with the seriousness of priests handling sacred scrolls, even if the sticks themselves were just simple wood plucked from nearby date palms. The concept is laughably simple. Stand a stick upright, watch where its shadow falls, and mark it. But as you lean down to trace a shadow's tip with your finger, you understand the subtle genius hidden in this basic tool. Shadows become both clock and compass, silent teachers that never speak yet tell everything. You watch a scribe carefully drag a finger along the sand, leaving tiny notches in a straight line where the shadow tip lands every hour. He pauses, squints, and mumbles something in a language you don't fully understand, probably scolding the stick for leaning slightly to the east. There's an almost comedic humanity to it. Here, thousands of years ago, someone is annoyed at a stick and the sun, and you can't help but smile at the familiar frustration. Historians still argue whether these early stick observations were purely functional or partly ritualistic, a gentle reminder that even in ancient Egypt, bureaucracy and devotion were intertwined. A farmer ambles past, dragging a water jug behind him, occasionally glancing at the shadows to decide if it's time to begin his morning work. You notice a small child trying to replicate the scribe's notches, though she's only scratching random lines and laughing when her brother's shadow overtakes hers. The playfulness of children against the strict measurement of adults creates a soft contrast, reminding you that learning, observation, and curiosity often walk hand in hand. One fringe theory suggests that the children's playful interference was actually encouraged. Their mistakes introduced variability that sometimes helped calibrate the sticks for better accuracy. You chuckle quietly at that, imagining a supervisor nodding solemnly at a 3-year-old's doodles. The sticks themselves vary in height, width, and placement, hinting at experimentation and personal preference. Some stand in perfectly straight rows, forming grids that could almost pass as a rough blueprint of a temple plaza. Others are oddly crooked, leaning slightly toward the river or tilted with the slope of the sand. You notice that the shadows behave differently depending on where they are planted. The finer-grained sand near the water creates soft, shifting shadows, while hardened mud closer to the homes produces crisp, sharp lines. These small nuances matter, you realize, because they directly influence when priests ring the morning bell, when farmers begin their chores, and even when children play hide-and-seek along the riverbank. The scribe scribbles on a broken shard of pottery, leaving rows of marks that represent measured intervals. He pauses occasionally to step back, squint at the stick, and mutter calculations. You can hear the soft hiss of sandals in the sand as he paces, a rhythm almost meditative. Here, in these precise yet humble actions, early humans are laying the foundation for a concept we take for granted: discrete, measurable time. There's also a quirky tidbit you might notice: a small jar of crocodile-dung nearby, intended as sunscreen or protection against insects. You giggle softly. Even timekeepers needed to survive the sun. The sun rises higher, and the shadows shrink. You see the scribe adjust a stick ever so slightly to account for the sun's tilt, measuring carefully, marking another notch in the sand. You follow each movement with your gaze, feeling the slow, hypnotic passage of time. At some point, you realize that the Egyptians are effectively conducting what we would now call experiments, altering stick positions, noting changes in shadow length, and refining their techniques. Some scholars debate how systematic these early experiments were, while fringe theorists claim that shadow arrangements sometimes formed symbolic patterns, perhaps aligning with temples or astronomical features. You wander among the sticks, tracing their shadows with your hand, feeling the warmth of the sun and the cool brush of the river breeze. Occasionally, you catch a shadow moving unexpectedly due to the irregular terrain, and a priest huffs, tapping a stick back into place. You marvel at the combination of simplicity and attention to detail, a plain piece of wood and sunlight, creating a complex, living measure of the day. It's hard not to think that a stick, something so ordinary, could wield such quiet authority over an entire society's rhythm. Nearby, an older woman carrying a woven basket of dates pauses to align her own stick with the shadows, a routine perhaps performed daily. You notice the faint carved marks near its base, worn smooth by decades of adjustments. Her hands are steady, practiced, each motion deliberate. This casual, almost domestic use of shadow measurement hints at a broader truth. Timekeeping wasn't solely a priestly task. It touched everyday life. Farmers, children, scribes, and elders all interacted with these sticks, and their shadows guided not just schedules, but a shared sense of order. You take a moment to compare two shadows, the first cast on soft sand, the other on hardened clay. The differences are slight but noticeable. The sand yields a slightly diffuse shadow, almost fuzzy at the edges, while the clay produces a sharp, well-defined line. You can see why Egyptians might have planted multiple sticks, experimenting to find the most reliable placement. Fringe theories suggest that some sticks might have been intentionally misaligned for ritual purposes, or even to subtly manipulate time for ceremonial readings. You grin at the thought. Time, sacred or mundane, was not entirely objective, even in 3000 BCE. A tiny breeze brushes past, shifting loose sand and slightly altering the shadows. The scribe sighs and makes another mark, murmuring a gentle admonishment to the wind. You reflect that these imperfections, the unpredictability of nature must have been constant companions to early timekeepers. Historians still argue whether Egyptians used these shifts to develop more sophisticated instruments, or if they merely learned to tolerate them, embracing the sun's quirks as part of life's rhythm. Either way, the patience required here is admirable, and maybe that's the first lesson shadows teach. Time is always moving, and you adjust, adapt, or fall behind. By mid-morning, the array of sticks forms a patchwork of shadow lines, each representing careful observation and iterative improvement. You follow a shadow tip that sweeps along the sand, imagining how its movement directs farming, ritual, and daily routines. A fringe note: some sticks were reportedly painted or adorned with symbols to track special days or festivals, blending the practical with the celebratory. You smile, picturing a stick decked out like a party hat. A small human touch that makes ancient timekeeping feel surprisingly alive. As the sun climbs toward its zenith, the shadows shrink to their shortest lengths, and you sense a pause in the day's rhythm. Priests stand silently, scribes lean on sticks, and children quietly trace lines in the sand. You, walking slowly among them, feel the gentle, hypnotic pull of observing time itself, the subtle shifts, the calm regularity, and the occasional chaos of wind, wandering goats, or playful kids. The lesson is clear. Even something as simple as a stick in the sand can structure life, guide communities, and subtly shape civilizations. The Egyptians' shadow sticks, humble as they seem, embody a dance of observation, patience, and human curiosity. Each stick's shadow becomes a marker not just of hours, but of life's rhythm, a bridge between the physical world, societal order, and even spiritual meaning. And as you step back to watch the interplay of sun, stick, and sand, you feel a quiet appreciation for these first experiments in timekeeping, a gentle hum of history beneath the buzzing Nile air and the slow, mesmerizing passage of morning into midday. The shadows lengthen and shorten again as the sun arcs across the sky, and you trudge slowly alongside the line of sticks, letting the warmth seep into your shoulders and the gentle rustle of papyrus whisper in your ears. There's a rhythm to the day, subtle but undeniable, as if the very earth itself participates in the measurement of time. You notice the priests moving deliberately between sticks, occasionally stopping to compare two shadow tips side by side. One leans in, squinting, muttering, "Closer, but not quite." Another shakes his head, as if offended by the impertinence of sunlight. You can't help but imagine a tiny feud over the sun's attitude, though of course it is completely imaginary. Historians still argue whether these shadow comparisons were standardized or left to personal interpretation, and you feel a quiet thrill at being present in that ambiguity. You wander toward the edge of the temple precincts, where additional sticks are arranged in a small semicircle. Some are embedded in stone, while others poke out from packed mud. It's almost like a sundial army, lined up to fight the unknown hours. A child, giggling, darts between the sticks, and you catch a glimpse of her shadow flickering across the smooth stone, momentarily merging with the marks of the priests. There's a fringe theory suggesting that children were encouraged to play among the shadow sticks to test their accuracy, an accidental quality control system. You shake your head and smile. How utterly human, and yet how surprisingly clever. You pause beside a stick marked with tiny notches that seem to spiral ever so slightly. Perhaps someone was experimenting with fractions of time longer ago than anyone remembers. Or maybe, you think, it was simply boredom. The idea that someone might have invented the notion of incremental time by casually scratching a stick in sand feels both trivial and monumental at once. A farmer wanders by, pausing to glance at the marks. He mutters to himself, calculating the best moment to begin watering his fields. Shadows, after all, are impartial. They move regardless of your desires, your hunger, or your sense of urgency. The breeze picks up slightly, lifting fine grains of sand that drift lazily across the smooth surfaces. You brush one away and realize the markings are surprisingly persistent. The Egyptians were already experimenting with ways to maintain permanence in their observations. Some marks are reinforced with blackened resin or filled with ochre, so they endure the wind, water, and wandering feet. You smile at the creativity and ingenuity. Primitive, yes, but effective. You might giggle quietly to yourself, imagining a historian centuries from now debating whether that resin was practical, ritualistic, or merely decorative. Scholars still argue whether these embellishments were functional or symbolic, and the ambiguity makes the scene feel alive, layered with intention and chance. Further along, you spot a cluster of priests gathered near a larger stick embedded in limestone. This one appears to be the centerpiece, taller and more refined than the rest. They observe its shadow with meticulous attention, aligning it to mark the high point of the sun, the moment we now call noon. A fringe idea suggests that the positioning of this central stick corresponded with certain celestial events, perhaps solstices or equinoxes, effectively bridging daily and annual timekeeping. You lean against a low wall and watch, noting how seriously they regard this simple wooden post, shadow stretching precisely on the stone surface. Nearby, a scribe crouches over a shard of pottery, notching marks along its edge with painstaking care. He looks up occasionally, comparing the tip of the shadow against a pre-existing line, muttering figures under his breath. You notice a small cup of water beside him, and an unusual detail catches your eye. Tiny floating insects drift lazily across its surface. Perhaps they are curious, perhaps indifferent. In any case, the scribe doesn't flinch. He's engrossed in the shadow's progression. You think about the patience required, the single-minded focus, and the strange satisfaction that must come from watching a shadow align exactly with a pre-marked point. Across the riverbank, a fisherman prepares his nets, his movements surprisingly synchronized with the stick's shadows. You notice that certain shadows align with his routine. A longer shadow signals it's time to haul in the smaller nets, while the central stick's shadow marks a pause before midday rest. Even though these shadow measurements are rudimentary by our standards, they govern daily life in a quiet, pervasive way. You probably chuckle at the thought that an invisible, moving line of darkness shapes everything from rituals to breakfast timing to fieldwork, and yet no one seems to complain. As you move along the sand, you spot subtle irregularities. Some sticks lean slightly toward the sun's path. Others are set at odd angles. It's a visual reminder that even within a culture obsessed with order, imperfection is inevitable. Fringe historians suggest these deviations could reflect local experimentation, symbolic meaning, or even aesthetic preference. You find yourself wondering how much trial and error went into this simple arrangement before it became reliable enough to structure entire communities. The scent of baked bread drifts on the breeze, blending with the river's earthy aroma. You hear distant chatter, laughter, and the occasional bleat of goats. The humans are enmeshed in the sun's rhythm, yet life continues around them, messy, unpredictable, delightfully alive. One priest notices a wandering goat grazing too close to a stick and mutters a quiet curse. You imagine, perhaps humorously, that this goat is the original time saboteur. Shadows continue their quiet march across sand and stone. A few sticks are adorned with minor carvings, an eye, a sunburst, or the faintest zigzag pattern. You can't tell if these are lucky charms, simple decorations, or early attempts at symbolic calculation. Historians still argue about whether such embellishments were functional, aesthetic, or spiritual. You lean back, letting the warmth of the day settle into your limbs, and marvel at the combination of simplicity and sophistication at work. The array of sticks, shadows, scribes, priests, farmers, and children together forms a living network of time measurement. You notice how minor variations, wind, sand texture, human error, add texture to the system, and yet the overall pattern is astonishingly coherent. Fringe theorists even suggest that by observing shadows in this way, Egyptians might have developed rudimentary methods for predicting seasonal changes. You smile, considering that something so mundane as watching a shadow could yield insights that shaped agriculture, religion, and culture. By late morning, you feel the gentle pull of meditation in observing these subtle, repetitive motions. The shadows have shortened, lengthened, and shifted again, and you've almost forgotten the modern world, wrapped in the rhythm of sun, stick, and sand. A distant bird caws as a reminder that nature continues its own cycles, indifferent, yet perfectly aligned with human observation. You realize that these early methods of timekeeping are not only practical, but deeply hypnotic, offering a sense of order and predictability in a world otherwise dominated by chance and unpredictability. As you pause to stretch, you reflect on the gentle comedy of it all, priests debating a stick's tilt, scribes obsessing over minute notches, goats grazing unwittingly on sacred markers, and children turning serious time measurement into play. You feel a sleepy satisfaction in recognizing the deeply human element woven into every shadow and every mark in the sand. And in that recognition, you sense the quiet, persistent heartbeat of history, guiding both your imagination and the measured rhythm of the Nile. You follow a particularly tall stick, set apart from the rest, noticing how its shadow arcs across the sand in a slow, unrelenting sweep. Each step you take alongside it is measured not by distance, but by the subtle shift in shadow length. You feel the gentle weight of time pressing against your consciousness, a silent cadence orchestrated by the sun. Priests and scribes move around you like calm, deliberate dancers, bending occasionally to adjust sticks, smooth notches in the sand, or check their records. There's a quiet poetry in these motions, a combination of discipline and ritual that whispers of a civilization learning to harness something invisible yet vital. You probably won't survive a day in their sandals, but you can savor the hypnotic rhythm from your comfortable spot. The scribe near this central stick uses a broken flint knife to etch tiny marks on a ceramic shard, each line representing a division of the day. The precision is astonishing, yet there's a charming imperfection. Some lines wobble slightly, evidence of the human hand at work. You glance at a nearby stick where someone has carved a faint spiral, perhaps an experiment in tracking seasonal shifts. Or maybe a doodle made in boredom. Historians still argue whether spirals, zigzags, and other minor carvings served practical measurement purposes, or were symbolic annotations with ritual significance. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face, amused by the thought of early Egyptians multitasking between science, art, and devotion. A small child peeks from behind a scribe's sandals, trying to mimic the motions of marking shadow tips in the sand. She giggles as her tiny hand misaligns a notch, and the scribe barely glances down, eyes intent on the primary measurements. A fringe theory claims that children's miscalculations sometimes unintentionally corrected subtle misalignments, improving overall accuracy. You chuckle quietly at the image of a 3-year-old unknowingly contributing to the precision of ancient timekeeping. You notice the shadows behaving differently on various textures. Fine sand near the river's edge produces a diffuse, slightly wavy shadow, while hardened clay creates a crisp, precise line. This small nuance matters. Priests and scribes rely on the clearest, most consistent shadows for their daily records. They adjust stick positions to account for uneven terrain, shifting sunlight, and the occasional goat wandering too close. It's both amusing and humbling to realize that such rudimentary materials required careful observation and a degree of scientific thinking not often credited to ancient peoples. Nearby, an older woman carrying a woven basket of dates places a small stick in the sun, aligning it with the central shadow to mark midday. Her hands are steady and precise, years of experience evident in the confident way she measures. Shadows, in this sense, were not only tools for priests or scribes. They governed agricultural practices, guided cooking times, and even structured leisure. Fringe historians suggest that shadow sticks may have also been used to subtly convey social or ritual messages, though evidence is sparse. You smile, picturing someone using a stick's shadow to hint at the start of a festival or to signal the end of a workday. The sun continues its unhurried arc, and you notice a particularly low stick, casting a long, narrow shadow that snakes across a small courtyard. Its angle is slightly off, probably due to a minor slope in the sand. A priest kneels beside it, muttering figures under his breath while scratching corrections into the soft ground. You can't help but admire the patience on display. Historians still debate how much trial and error experimentation shaped the development of more advanced sundials and shadow clocks later in Egyptian history. You sense that each minor adjustment here, in the seemingly mundane act of correcting a stick's tilt, laid the groundwork for centuries of timekeeping innovation. A scribe lifts a measuring cord to check distances between shadows, ensuring accuracy across the array of sticks. You watch as the line sweeps across the sand, bridging multiple shadows like an invisible ruler. Fringe theorists suggest that early Egyptians may have intuitively understood principles akin to geometry long before formal documentation. You squint, imagining a stick casting a perfect line, and think about the delicate balance between observation, intuition, and manual labor required to maintain these rudimentary timekeeping systems. You wander further to a cluster of shorter sticks near the riverbank. Their shadows overlap, creating a complex lattice of dark lines across the sand. A young priest steps gingerly through the network, adjusting small stones to mark intersections where shadows cross or diverge. The play of light and shadow forms a living diagram of the day's passage, and you find yourself hypnotized by the subtle choreography. A fringe note. Some of these intersections might have been used to track seasonal events or lunar positions, hinting at an early understanding of celestial cycles beyond the daily sun path. The faint scent of papyrus and baked bread drifts on the air, blending with the earthy aroma of wet mud. A distant flock of birds rises, their shadows briefly joining the dance of sticks on the ground. You realize that these measurements exist within a vibrant, noisy environment, not an isolated laboratory. The Egyptians' ability to extract order from chaos, to track hours and moments amidst the unpredictable rhythms of life, is quietly impressive. Historians still argue whether this blend of ritual, observation, and practicality was conscious experimentation or intuitive tradition passed through generations. As the sun nears its zenith, you observe the shadow of the tallest stick shrinking to its shortest point. A priest marks the sand meticulously, noting the moment as the true noon, a benchmark for both ritual and daily work. Fringe theories propose that certain ceremonial events may have been scheduled specifically for this peak, tying human activity to solar precision in a way that feels both magical and methodical. You smile at the thought, imagining festival preparations beginning as the shadow reaches its apex. A gentle wind stirs, carrying loose sand across the courtyard. You see the scribes brushing small grains away to keep their measurements accurate. Even minor disturbances demand attention. A misplaced pebble or a drifting feather could introduce error. The act of constant correction, of careful maintenance, turns a simple stick into a precise instrument of civilization. You can't help but appreciate the effort involved and imagine quietly muttering "kids these days" under your breath if you were a timekeeping supervisor. Across the courtyard, another scribe traces additional notches on a ceramic shard, recording the shadow's position every half hour. The shard, rough and chipped at the edges, seems unassuming, yet it holds vital information. Fringe historians suggest that these shards might have doubled as teaching tools, allowing apprentices to learn shadow measurement without risking disruption to the primary sticks. You nod thoughtfully, imagining ancient classrooms along the Nile, filled with attentive students learning patience, observation, and perhaps the occasional practical joke. You wander back toward the main cluster of sticks, observing the interplay between short shadows and long shadows between human adjustments and natural variations. The rhythm of the day unfolds in subtle waves, guided by light and shaped by human hands. A distant laugh echoes across the sand as a child runs, shadows stretching and shrinking like a living tape measure. You realize that this simple yet ingenious method of measuring time links generations, daily life, and the grand cycle of the sun in a quiet, enduring harmony. The scribe finally leans back, satisfied, wiping sweat from his brow. You notice a tiny jar of pigment nearby, possibly ochre or charcoal, used to reinforce marks against erosion. It's a small, almost comical reminder that even in the gravest work of civilization, human creativity and practicality are inseparable. Historians still debate the extent to which these measures influenced later innovations in mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, but the evidence of observation, care, and incremental experimentation is undeniable. By late morning, the dance of shadows continues, weaving through sticks, sand, and human life. You feel a sense of calm, a gentle awareness of the meticulous rhythm that underpins ancient Egyptian society. Even without modern clocks, calendars, or technology, these shadow sticks orchestrate an elegant, quiet symphony of order and human ingenuity. You exhale slowly, letting the warmth of the sun and the hypnotic movement of shadows fill your mind with a subtle sense of wonder and sleepy appreciation. You stroll along the Nile's edge, the river whispering a soft, continuous hum that blends with the gentle shuffle of feet on sand and the distant calls of waterfowl. The shadow sticks stretch out like an informal orchestra, each casting its note across the sun-baked earth. You notice how even minor variations, a slightly bent stick, a clump of sand, a stray leaf, alter the composition, adding tiny nuances to the rhythm of the day. Priests and scribes move with deliberate care, adjusting, marking, and observing, their motions as methodical as breathing. You probably can't imagine the patience required to attend to shadows hour after hour, but there's a meditative quality to it that lulls your mind into a gentle, dreamy awareness. A scribe crouches over a shard of baked clay, tracing the tip of a shadow with an ink made from soot and gum. Each small mark is carefully labelled, and occasionally he pauses to compare it with previous lines, muttering a soft calculation. Fringe theories suggest that these shards may have been used not only as records, but as rudimentary teaching tools, a way to pass observational knowledge from master to apprentice. You smile at the thought of a young student, tongue peeking out between lips, meticulously tracing shadows, just as your imagination traces the story unfolding before you. Historians still argue whether these markings were strictly functional or imbued with symbolic meaning, and that ambiguity carries a subtle charm. Nearby, a low stick leans slightly eastward, casting a long, elegant shadow that stretches over smooth sand and tiny stones. You notice that a goat has wandered too close, sniffing the stick, and a priest waves a hand gently, redirecting the animal. Fringe researchers claim that these minor disruptions were considered omens, the interference of animals in shadow measurements sometimes interpreted as messages from the divine. You chuckle quietly, imagining the seriousness with which a wandering goat could be read as prophetic insight. As the sun climbs higher, the shadows shorten. You pause at a semicircle of small sticks near a patch of papyrus reeds. A priest gently brushes sand from their bases, ensuring the shadows are not obscured, while a young apprentice crouches nearby, carefully marking each tip. Fringe theories suggest that children were encouraged to mimic these tasks, inadvertently contributing to the precision of timekeeping while learning patience and observation. You lean against a wall of sun-warmed bricks, enjoying the quiet choreography of shadows, humans, and the natural world. A taller stick, centrally placed, draws your attention. Its shadow falls neatly upon a cluster of smaller sticks, marking a high point in the sun's arc. This is the equivalent of noon, the moment when shadows are shortest. Priests gather, some consulting small tablets, others nodding knowingly. Fringe historians propose that the central stick may have also been used to track longer cycles, such as solstices or equinoxes, suggesting an early intersection of daily life and celestial observation. You imagine the deliberate reverence in aligning human activity to the solar rhythm, a marriage of practicality and subtle ceremony. You notice the careful layering of lines in the sand, marks of previous hours faintly visible beneath new inscriptions. Scribes occasionally scrape or reinforce lines with pigment, blackened resin, or ochre. Even these minor touches suggest a sophisticated understanding of preservation and continuity. Historians still argue whether these measures were primarily functional, ritualistic, or a combination of both. You tilt your head back, feeling the sun's gentle heat, realizing that each meticulous mark represents countless human hours spent observing, adjusting, and refining. The air carries the faint aroma of baked bread and drying reeds, mingling with the earthy scent of mud from the riverbank. You see a farmer timing his labor according to the shadows, pausing when the central stick's shadow aligns with his measured mark and resuming as it moves past. The shadows govern work and leisure alike, a pervasive but gentle ruler over daily life. Fringe observations note that shadow sticks may have even influenced communal decisions, like the timing of markets or ceremonial processions. You smile at the idea of such a quiet, invisible governance guiding human rhythm across the centuries. A child runs past, laughing, casting a fleeting shadow that briefly merges with the scribe's marks. You notice the apprentice's eyes follow the child's movement, noting a slight deviation. Perhaps it's distraction, or perhaps the scribe is aware that shadows are alive, subject to variation and imperfection. Fringe theories suggest that these slight deviations were sometimes intentionally recorded to study irregularities, an early form of error analysis. Historians still debate whether such observations influenced later Egyptian innovations in geometry and astronomy. You wander further along the line of sticks, noticing how the shadows interact with varied terrain: sand, clay, smooth stone. Each surface produces subtle differences in shadow clarity, length, and diffusion. Priests and scribes accommodate these variations, adjusting sticks or correcting marks as needed. You find it quietly mesmerizing, the interplay of human intervention and natural variability forming a living diagram of the day's progression. Fringe theorists even suggest that these observations could have indirectly informed early water management and agricultural planning. Nearby, a tall stick's shadow aligns with a notch carved into the clay, marking a precise interval of time. The scribe beside it traces the shadow's edge meticulously, occasionally consulting another priest for confirmation. This combination of observation, notation, and verification suggests a proto-scientific rigor. Fringe historians speculate that the Egyptians' early attention to error correction and systematic measurement reflects a deeper cultural appreciation for order and reliability, extending beyond mere timekeeping. You exhale slowly, letting the quiet insistence of the day's rhythm settle over you. A small gathering of scribes convenes near a patch of sun-warmed sand, comparing notes, pointing to previous shadows, and adjusting new markings. One scribe mutters a faint calculation, another traces a small spiral to indicate a mid-morning interval. Fringe interpretations suggest that spirals and other simple shapes may have been used to visualize cumulative time, providing a mnemonic or teaching aid for apprentices. Historians still debate whether these shapes had practical applications, spiritual symbolism, or were purely decorative. You quietly admire the ingenuity embedded in such subtle acts. A gentle breeze carries grains of sand across the courtyard, softly shifting shadows in unexpected ways. A priest carefully resettles a few sticks to maintain alignment, while an apprentice crouches to observe the micro-movements. Fringe researchers suggest that wind-induced shadow variations may have prompted Egyptians to consider stability, permanence, and the predictability of natural phenomena. You nod, recognizing that the blend of curiosity, attention, and patience here foreshadows centuries of scientific inquiry to come. By midday, the shadows have shortened significantly, and you notice the distinct rhythm of the priest's movements. Check, adjust, mark, record, repeat. Each cycle is deliberate, almost hypnotic, a continuous meditation on time's passage. Fringe theorists speculate that the act of measuring and observing might have contributed to an early sense of temporal consciousness, a recognition that time could be quantified, manipulated, and harmonized with human activity. Historians still argue whether these methods directly influenced later innovations in horology and astronomy. You pause to inhale the warm, slightly dusty air, feeling the sun's energy gently pressing against your skin. Shadows continue their quiet, unrelenting progression, wrapping the courtyard in a patterned tapestry of light and darkness. You probably smile at the thought that these simple sticks, in their humble precision, silently orchestrate the day, bridging human life with the unyielding march of the sun. There's a quiet majesty in it, a sense that something profoundly human and profoundly ancient is unfolding under your very eyes. You wander back toward the central area where the tallest stick stands sentinel over the courtyard. The sun is past its zenith, and the shadows have begun to lengthen, stretching lazily toward the west. The scribe at its base dips a brush into a small jar of ochre, softly reinforcing lines that mark the passage of the day. You can almost hear the subtle brush strokes, as though the sand itself responds, whispering faint echoes of hours gone by. You probably wouldn't last a full morning in this ritualized environment without succumbing to both the heat and the hypnotic cadence of repeated measurement. Yet there is a comfort in its rhythm, a lullaby of shadow and sun. A young apprentice kneels beside a smaller stick, carefully noting the shadow's tip with a piece of charcoal. He pauses to glance at the central stick, comparing angles, then scribbles a small tally on a pottery shard. Fringe theories suggest that these mundane tallies may have been early experiments in tracking lunar or stellar movements, a subtle intersection of daily necessity and cosmic curiosity. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians consciously connected these small observations to broader astronomical patterns, or if the link was recognized only after centuries of cumulative practice. You imagine the apprentice's tongue peeking out in concentration, a timeless expression of focus, unchanged across millennia. Nearby, a goat wanders again, sniffing at a low stick, casting a thin shadow across compacted earth. A priest waves it away with quiet patience, muttering something about the precision of measurement and divine oversight. Fringe interpretations suggest that such minor animal disruptions were recorded as omens, hinting at a subtle spiritual dimension to what might otherwise appear purely practical. You chuckle quietly, envisioning a goat's shadow as a celestial messenger, casting cryptic advice over the sacred courtyard. The sun's angle changes noticeably now, revealing subtle inconsistencies in the shadows across varied terrain. Sand grains, small rocks, and patches of hardened clay create micro-fluctuations in shadow lines, forcing the scribes to adjust sticks minutely to maintain alignment. You notice a priest leaning low, using a short measuring cord to verify distances, a soft hum of calculation accompanying each delicate adjustment. Fringe historians speculate that such attention to detail represents an early understanding of geometry and proportionality, the seeds of mathematical thinking sprouting from the sand and sun. Across the courtyard, another priest sets a new stick into the ground with precise care, aligning it with a pre-existing mark. Its shadow intersects an older line, creating a subtle cross pattern. You feel a gentle thrill watching this intersection, as if the convergence of shadows is a secret handshake with time itself. Fringe interpretations suggest that these intersections could have been used to mark intervals of work, prayer, or observation, essentially creating a living schedule that synchronized the community with the sun's march across the sky. Historians still debate the extent to which these observations structured daily life versus ritual practice. You wander toward a semicircle of shorter sticks, their shadows forming a fan across the warm sand. A scribe moves between them, occasionally brushing a tiny pebble aside or adjusting a stick's angle by mere centimeters. The meticulous care reminds you that these instruments, though simple in appearance, require constant attention. Fringe theories even propose that repeated measurement and careful alignment of shadows could have facilitated early experiments in tracking seasonal changes and predicting Nile flooding. You nod in quiet admiration, imagining centuries of patient observation distilled into these unassuming sticks. A child runs along the perimeter, laughing, casting a fleeting shadow that briefly overlaps with a scribe's notations. You watch the apprentice's eyes follow the movement, aware that each deviation, however minor, offers subtle insight into the variability of light, terrain, and time. Fringe historians suggest that these minor observations may have informed the development of more complex tools, such as early sundials and shadow clocks. Historians still argue whether this blending of play, observation, and ritual was intentional or an incidental byproduct of daily life. You notice that the shadows behave differently across textures. Smooth river sand produces crisp lines, while the rougher courtyard sand diffuses edges slightly. Priests adjust stick placement, recording subtle variations, aware that even minor differences matter. Fringe theories suggest that these micro-observations reflect a proto-scientific curiosity, a recognition that the natural world offers both consistency and unpredictability. You smile at the thought that ancient timekeepers were engaging with the world in a manner that feels remarkably familiar, even modern. Near the edge of the courtyard, a scribe bends over a particularly low stick, noting its shadow's faint path. Small ripples in the sand create unexpected curves, and he adjusts the stick with a precision that seems almost reverent. Fringe interpretations suggest that such adjustments reflect an intuitive understanding of optics and angles, a rudimentary yet profound grasp of how light and form interact. Historians still debate how much of this knowledge was codified versus transmitted orally or experientially. A tall stick in the far corner now casts a long, slender shadow that drifts across the courtyard's stones. You watch as a priest aligns the shadow's tip with a small notch carved into the sand, whispering softly to himself while calculating the time until the next hour. Fringe historians claim these notches may have represented increments of labor, prayer, or ceremonial observance, a subtle system blending practicality and ritual. You imagine the quiet satisfaction of marking time accurately in a world without clocks, each line a heartbeat of communal life. The air carries the sense of papyrus, warm mud, and distant bread baking. Birds occasionally dip across the courtyard, their fleeting shadows momentarily joining the measured dance. You feel a sense of calm, the meticulous rhythm of observation wrapping around you like a soft blanket. Fringe theories even propose that these shadow-based timekeeping methods subtly influence societal structures, dictating when markets opened, when prayers were said, and when communal work began or ended. Historians still debate the precise degree of influence, yet the evidence of structured observation is undeniable. A young apprentice sits beside a small jar of pigment, carefully reinforcing lines on a shard, his movements deliberate and hypnotic. You imagine generations of children learning to mark, observe, and respect the passage of time in this gentle, sunlit courtyard. Fringe interpretations suggest that training in shadow observation could have cultivated attention to detail, patience, and even early mathematical reasoning. Historians still argue about the balance between ritualistic, practical, and educational motives in these practices. You notice shadows subtly intersecting, forming patterns that are almost artistic. Priests and scribes adjust sticks with quiet concentration, occasionally nodding to one another in approval or subtle guidance. Fringe historians claim that these patterns may have had symbolic significance, perhaps marking auspicious intervals or coordinating rituals with celestial events. You lean back, feeling the warmth of the sun, and let the hypnotic choreography of light, shadow, and human movement lull your mind into a contemplative calm. By mid-afternoon, the shadows are long and elegant, stretching across the courtyard like living ribbons. The priest's movements have slowed into a gentle, almost meditative rhythm, checking, adjusting, and recording as the sun arcs gradually toward the horizon. You probably smile, realizing that what appears as a simple array of sticks and shadows is in fact an intricate living system, blending practical timekeeping, observation, ritual, and subtle artistry into one continuous, hypnotic symphony of light. You follow the shadows as they drift lazily westward, feeling the heat of the afternoon sun brushing your skin. The tallest stick's shadow stretches across the courtyard, a sharp line that grows fainter at its edges, tapering like a pencil of light drawn across warm sand. You notice the scribes moving quietly around it, adjusting smaller sticks to ensure alignment, carefully brushing grains of sand aside. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost meditative, like watching a metronome tick with the sun instead of a pendulum. You probably won't survive a full day of this without nodding off. But there's a strange satisfaction in observing this ancient choreography. A priest kneels near the base of a stick, measuring the shadow's tip against a small carved line in the sand. He murmurs softly, confirming the alignment, while a young apprentice crouches nearby, copying the mark onto a piece of baked clay. Fringe theories suggest these clay fragments may have been early teaching tools, allowing scribes to compare shadow lengths and calibrate their methods without disturbing the sand. Historians still argue whether these artifacts were purely practical or carried a symbolic weight, representing the ordered universe reflected on Earth. You smile at the thought of an apprentice, perhaps barely 10 years old, learning geometry and astronomy in the guise of daily labor. Nearby, a low stick has cast a diagonal shadow across a small mound of sand. You notice a goat nibbling at nearby reeds, briefly disturbing the shadow. A priest waves it away gently, muttering something about the sacred rhythm of the sun. Fringe interpretations claim that even minor disruptions by animals or wind were sometimes recorded as omens, giving the mundane act of timekeeping a touch of spiritual significance. You can't help chuckling at the idea of a goat acting as a cosmic messenger, shaping the day's measurements by its curious nose. Across the courtyard, a semicircle of sticks catches your eye. Their shadows fan outward, forming a miniature sundial of sorts. The scribe moves carefully, repositioning one stick that has shifted slightly, while another traces the tip's path with charcoal. Fringe historians suggest that this arrangement may have been an early experiment in tracking intervals of time more precisely, effectively creating a primitive calendar of hours. Historians still debate whether these configurations were standardized or varied according to local custom and priestly preference. You lean back on the warm sand, admiring the methodical dance of shadows and human intention. A particularly tall stick now casts a long shadow across smooth clay, intersecting with marks made earlier in the day. A priest consults a small tablet, verifying that the shadow aligns with predicted measurements. Fringe theories propose that these precise alignments may have been used to anticipate celestial events or mark seasonal shifts, connecting daily observations with the broader rhythm of the heavens. You feel a quiet awe, imagining generations of Egyptians observing these same patterns, day after day, refining their understanding with patient dedication. The breeze picks up slightly, sending tiny grains of sand across the courtyard, subtly blurring the edges of the shadows. A scribe leans in, smoothing the surface and realigning the stick, conscious that even minor deviations can disrupt the measurement. Fringe interpretations suggest that these micro-adjustments demonstrate an early form of quality control, a proto-scientific attention to detail that blends observation, ritual, and practical necessity. Historians still debate the extent to which these practices influenced later Egyptian mathematics and astronomy. You wander toward a smaller grouping of sticks, observing the shadows sliding across the sand. A child runs past, casting a fleeting shadow that merges briefly with the scribe's lines. The apprentice watches carefully, noting the deviation. Fringe historians propose that tracking such variations may have subtly trained observational skills, attention to detail, and predictive reasoning in young learners. Historians still argue whether this was intentional pedagogical design or a happy accident of daily life. The afternoon sun grows warmer, and you notice the shadows lengthening more rapidly. Priests move with a slow, deliberate grace, their actions measured and almost ceremonial. Fringe theories suggest that the repetitive process of adjusting and marking shadows may have served both practical and meditative purposes, embedding patience, rhythm, and cosmic awareness into daily routines. You close your eyes briefly, feeling the hypnotic cadence of movement, shadow, and sunlight wash over you. Across the courtyard, a scribe carefully inspects a small stick, noticing the shadow's faint taper toward a tiny notch in the sand. He marks the tip with charcoal, consulting a colleague nearby. Fringe interpretations suggest that these notches may have represented divisions of labor or intervals of prayer, subtly structuring communal life in tandem with the sun's progress. Historians still debate whether such practices were primarily practical, ritualistic, or a combination of both. You nod thoughtfully, realizing that the simplicity of sticks and shadows belies the sophistication of the system. You pause near a semicircle of short sticks, each casting a thin line of shadow. A priest gently nudges a stick into alignment, while the apprentice marks the tip's position on a pottery shard. Fringe historians suggest that recording multiple points throughout the day allowed for early error correction, an understanding that observation alone is not enough without careful notation and verification. Historians still argue whether such meticulous practices influenced later Egyptian innovations in timekeeping and astronomy. The air carries the faint scent of river mud, dried reeds, and the warm earth of the courtyard. Birds fly overhead, their shadows fleeting across the meticulously marked sand. You find a sense of calm in this orchestration, the subtle, unspoken dialogue between human hands and natural light. Fringe theories propose that these shadow observations subtly informed agricultural planning, ceremonial timing, and social coordination, embedding the sun's rhythm into the pulse of daily life. Historians still debate the precise applications, but the evidence of structured observation is clear. Near the edge of the courtyard, a young apprentice studies the shadow of a low stick. He carefully measures the tip against a line drawn earlier, adjusting a nearby pebble to mark the alignment. Fringe interpretations suggest that the act of precise measurement may have fostered early geometric reasoning, attention to detail, and spatial awareness. Historians still argue whether this focus on accuracy was primarily functional, educational, or ritualistic. You notice shadows overlapping subtly, forming fleeting patterns that shift with each passing minute. Priests and scribes move among them, adjusting sticks with soft murmurs and gentle nods. Fringe historians suggest these patterns may have held symbolic significance, marking auspicious times or coordinating ritual activities with celestial events. You feel a deep sense of wonder at the quiet intelligence embedded in this daily, sunlit choreography. By late afternoon, the shadows stretch long across the courtyard, echoing the slow march of the sun toward the horizon. The priest's movements have slowed into a meditative cadence, checking, adjusting, and recording with deliberate calm. You probably smile, appreciating that these simple sticks, in their humble precision, are conduits of both time and culture, bridging the human and the celestial in an elegant, unspoken dialogue that has endured for millennia. You follow the fading shadows as they stretch ever longer across the courtyard, the sun's warmth softening into the gentle embrace of late afternoon. The tallest stick now casts a shadow so elongated that it skims the edges of the ancient stones, a delicate finger pointing toward the distant horizon. You notice the scribes moving with languid care, adjusting smaller sticks that have shifted slightly in the day's heat or under the faint nudge of a wandering animal. You probably won't survive a full day of this ritualistic patience without nodding off more than once. But there is a peculiar satisfaction in observing the quiet precision that governs these ancient movements, like watching time itself being coaxed into order by human hands. A priest kneels beside a low stick, carefully marking the tip of its shadow on a small tablet. He hums softly, the sound blending with the whisper of the warm breeze across the courtyard. Fringe theories suggest that these tablets could have functioned as both teaching aids and early records of seasonal patterns, capturing the subtle shifts of sun and shadow for future reference. Historians still debate whether the ancient Egyptians consciously linked these observations to broader celestial patterns, or whether the connection only emerged through centuries of accumulated knowledge. You can almost picture a young apprentice learning not just to measure, but to anticipate, tracing the rhythm of light like a familiar lullaby. Nearby, a goat grazes quietly, occasionally sending its shadow across the carefully marked lines. A priest waves it away with a soft chuckle, muttering something about the sacred duty of observation. Fringe interpretations propose that even such minor disruptions were sometimes interpreted as omens, subtle indicators of how the natural world might influence human affairs. You grin at the thought of a goat acting as a divine messenger, nudging the rhythm of the day in unexpected ways. Across the courtyard, a semicircle of shorter sticks creates a miniature sundial, their shadows fanning outward with meticulous precision. A scribe moves slowly, adjusting one stick that has shifted slightly, while an apprentice traces the shadow's path with charcoal. Fringe historians suggest that this arrangement may have been an early attempt to divide the day into consistent intervals, effectively creating a rudimentary clock. Historians still debate whether such configurations were standardized across regions or adapted locally by different priestly authorities. You lean back against a warm stone, watching the interplay of light and shadow with a quiet fascination, appreciating the blend of simplicity and sophistication. A particularly tall stick casts a long, slender shadow that intersects several older markings in the sand. A priest consults a small tablet, confirming alignment with earlier measurements. Fringe theories propose that these precise intersections may have been used to anticipate seasonal changes or mark important festivals, connecting the mundane passage of hours with larger cosmic rhythms. You feel a quiet awe imagining generations of Egyptians engaging in this patient, methodical practice, each day contributing to a collective understanding of the sun's arc. The afternoon breeze rustles the nearby papyrus leaves, shifting tiny grains of sand and blurring shadow edges. A scribe leans in, smoothing the surface and realigning a stick, conscious that even minute deviations can affect accuracy. Fringe interpretations suggest that these micro-adjustments demonstrate early observational science, a blend of ritual, practicality, and nascent curiosity about the natural world. Historians still debate how these meticulous practices influenced later developments in Egyptian mathematics and astronomy. You approach a grouping of small sticks, their shadows crossing each other in a delicate lattice. An apprentice follows the movement closely, recording intersections on a pottery shard. Fringe historians propose that observing these intersections may have trained precision, attention to detail, and early spatial reasoning. Historians still argue whether this was an intentional pedagogical strategy or simply a byproduct of daily practice. The sun dips lower, casting shadows with longer, softer edges. Priests move slowly among the sticks, adjusting and marking with meditative patience. Fringe theories suggest that the repetitive act of observing and recording shadows may have nurtured both practical skills and contemplative awareness, embedding a rhythm that shaped daily life. You close your eyes briefly, letting the hypnotic cadence of human movement, sunlight and shadow wash over you, imagining yourself a part of this quiet, ancient symphony. Across the courtyard, a scribe inspects a short stick whose shadow has drifted across a faint notch in the sand. He marks the tip with charcoal and consults a colleague nearby. Fringe interpretations propose that such notches may have been used to divide labor, coordinate rituals, or mark periods of study, blending practical and ceremonial purposes. Historians still debate the balance between these functions, but the careful recording suggests a sophisticated understanding of time's passage. You pause near a semicircle of sticks, each casting thin, precise shadows. A priest nudges a stick into alignment, while an apprentice marks the tip's position on a small tablet. Fringe historians suggest that multiple daily observations allowed for early error correction, recognizing that timekeeping requires both observation and documentation. Historians still argue whether this meticulous system influenced broader innovations in Egyptian timekeeping or astronomy. The courtyard smells faintly of warm mud, papyrus, and sun-baked clay. Birds fly overhead, their fleeting shadows joining the structured dance below. You feel a serene calm as human and natural elements harmonize. Fringe theories propose that these shadow observations subtly guided agricultural activity, ceremonial timing, and social coordination, embedding the sun's rhythm into communal life. Historians still debate the precise applications, yet the evidence of structured observation is unmistakable. At the edge of the courtyard, an apprentice studies the shadow of a low stick, carefully measuring it against earlier markings. He adjusts a pebble to mark the tip's location. Fringe interpretations suggest that this practice fostered early geometric reasoning, patience, and spatial awareness. Historians still argue whether the focus on accuracy was primarily functional, educational, or ritualistic. Shadows overlap and form ephemeral patterns that shift by the minute. Priests move among them, adjusting sticks with soft murmurs and quiet approval. Fringe historians suggest that such patterns may have carried symbolic significance, marking auspicious times or coordinating ritual activities with celestial events. You watch quietly, marveling at the understated intelligence embedded in this sunlit choreography. By late afternoon, shadows stretch long and thin, echoing the sun's slow journey toward the horizon. The priest's movements have become meditative, deliberate, almost tender. You probably smile, recognizing that these simple sticks, in their humble precision, serve as conduits between humanity and the heavens, bridging the terrestrial and the celestial in a quiet, enduring dance that has persisted for thousands of years. The sun is beginning its slow descent, and the courtyard is bathed in a mellow golden glow. Shadows lengthen and soften, stretching across the sand like the fingers of time itself. You trudge along, barefoot on the warm, textured ground, feeling every grain shift beneath your feet. The tallest stick now casts a shadow so long it nearly touches the far wall, and you can't help but marvel at the way such simple implements can command the rhythm of an entire day. You probably won't survive this kind of patience-intensive observation without the occasional daydream, but there's a mesmerizing calm in watching these shadows slide imperceptibly across the courtyard. A priest hovers near a small grouping of sticks, carefully realigning each one as if tuning a delicate instrument. The shadows bend and intersect in quiet harmony, forming subtle patterns that only attentive eyes can discern. Fringe theories suggest that these geometric intersections were more than functional. They may have been used to convey symbolic or spiritual messages, encoding cosmological concepts into the layout of shadows. Historians still argue whether these patterns were intentionally designed as visual metaphors or merely practical tools for marking time. You chuckle softly, imagining an ancient Egyptian scribal apprentice taking notes on cosmic secrets hidden in a courtyard sundial. Nearby, a goat scampers through the courtyard, its small shadow skimming the edges of the meticulously aligned sticks. A scribe waves it away, muttering about the sanctity of sunlight and the audacity of unruly animals. Fringe interpretations claim that such incidental disruptions might have been read as subtle signs, minor omens woven into the fabric of daily observation. You smile at the thought of an ordinary goat inadvertently influencing a priest's sense of cosmic order, a tiny chaos against the backdrop of meticulous timekeeping. You move toward a semicircle of short sticks, their shadows fanning outward like spokes on a wheel. A scribe kneels, marking the tip of one shadow with charcoal, while an apprentice traces the intersecting lines onto a tablet. Fringe historians propose that these arrangements may have been early experiments in dividing the day into more precise segments, a rudimentary clock of sorts. Historians still debate whether these practices were standardized or varied between temples, priestly schools, or even cities. You imagine a network of courtyards across Egypt, each subtly unique, each contributing to a collective understanding of daylight's rhythm. The tallest stick's shadow now intersects several previously recorded points, forming a delicate lattice across the sand. A priest consults a small clay tablet, nodding as he confirms the alignment. Fringe theories suggest that these precise intersections were not just temporal markers, but may have been used to anticipate celestial events, or even seasonal agricultural shifts. Historians still argue about how consciously Egyptians linked these daily shadows to larger cosmic patterns. You feel a quiet awe, picturing generations of observant priests and scribes dedicating their days to this subtle, patient art of measurement. The afternoon breeze lifts loose grains of sand, gently blurring the sharp edges of shadows. A scribe leans in, smoothing the surface and adjusting a stick that has drifted, displaying an attention to detail that borders on ritualistic. Fringe interpretations suggest that these micro-corrections demonstrate an early form of scientific methodology, careful observation, documentation, and adjustment. Historians still debate whether the precision was primarily practical, educational, or spiritual. You inhale deeply, savoring the mix of sand, sun, and the faint scent of papyrus nearby. You wander to a small cluster of sticks whose shadows crisscross in subtle, fleeting patterns. An apprentice crouches, meticulously noting the shadow intersections on a pottery shard. Fringe historians suggest this may have been an exercise in spatial reasoning and early geometric training, teaching the young learners patience and precision. Historians still argue whether these techniques were intentional educational tools or byproducts of daily labor. You smile, imagining a child centuries ago, quietly learning the rhythm of the sun with sand, sticks, and charcoal. The sun dips lower, softening its glare, and shadows stretch long and thin. Priests move with meditative grace, adjusting sticks and marking shadows with deliberate care. Fringe theories suggest the repetitive motion may have been as much a form of meditation as a scientific practice, embedding rhythm, patience, and attentiveness into daily routines. You lean back on the warm ground, closing your eyes briefly, letting the hypnotic interplay of shadow and motion lull your mind. Across the courtyard, a short stick casts a shadow that drifts toward a faint notch in the sand. A scribe marks the tip with charcoal, consulting a colleague. Fringe interpretations suggest that these small notches may have served multiple purposes: practical, ceremonial, or even symbolic. Historians still debate the balance, but the dedication to precision is clear. You imagine the scribe's quiet satisfaction, the discipline, the quiet pride in accuracy. Near a semicircle of sticks, each shadow overlaps delicately. A priest gently nudges a stick into position, while an apprentice marks the tip on a small tablet. Fringe historians propose that tracking multiple points throughout the day allowed for early error correction, an understanding that observation alone is insufficient without careful recording. Historians still argue whether these techniques influenced later Egyptian mathematics or astronomy. The air carries the soft aroma of river mud and sun-baked clay. Birds fly overhead, their shadows fleeting across the courtyard. You sense a serene calm in the orchestrated human and natural movements. Fringe theories suggest that daily shadow observation subtly guided social organization, agricultural planning, and ritual timing. Historians still debate the specifics, but the clear pattern of structured observation is undeniable. At the far edge of the courtyard, a young apprentice studies the shadow of a low stick, aligning it precisely with previous markings and adjusting a small pebble to record the tip's location. Fringe interpretations suggest this nurtured early skills in geometric reasoning and spatial awareness. Historians still argue whether accuracy training was the main goal or a secondary effect of timekeeping practice. Shadows overlap, creating ephemeral, shifting patterns. Priests adjust sticks with gentle murmurs, maintaining alignment with patience that borders on reverence. Fringe historians propose that these patterns may have carried symbolic or ritualistic significance, subtly marking moments for prayers or ceremonies. You watch, entranced by the interplay of human diligence and the slow, inevitable movement of the sun. By late afternoon, shadows stretch across the courtyard, like golden threads connecting earth to sky. Priests move slowly, deliberately, with calm precision. You probably smile, recognizing that these humble sticks and simple lines of shadow serve as both tools and teachers, connecting human lives with celestial rhythm, mediating between the mundane and the divine in quiet, enduring harmony. The sun has begun to settle toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of apricot and soft lavender. Shadows now stretch long and thin across the courtyard, like fingers of light reaching desperately for the distant walls. You trudge along the warm, sun-baked sand, noticing how each stick's shadow seems to inch forward imperceptibly, a silent yet relentless march marking the passage of hours. You probably won't survive the patience required to track every subtle shift in real time, but there's an almost hypnotic quality in the methodical movement of these dark lines, like watching time itself unfurl under human guidance. A priest crouches beside a particularly tall stick, tracing its elongated shadow carefully with a piece of charcoal. He glances at a nearby tablet, comparing today's line to records of previous days. Fringe interpretations suggest that this practice may have also served as a record-keeping system, a way to subtly track seasonal changes or the sun's path across years. Historians still argue whether these meticulous observations were used primarily for ritual, agriculture, or a primitive form of astronomy. You smile at the idea of ancient priests acting as both spiritual guides and early astronomers, scribbling in the sand while the sun performs its slow dance. Near a semicircle of shorter sticks, an apprentice kneels, adjusting a shadow that has drifted slightly, mindful of accuracy. Fringe theories propose that such repetitive attention to minor adjustments may have been intended to cultivate patience and focus, teaching young minds the rhythm of disciplined observation. Historians still debate whether these educational aims were deliberate or simply a natural byproduct of timekeeping practices. You lean against a warm stone, feeling the heat seep through your clothes, imagining a similar apprentice centuries ago, tracing shadows in patient, contemplative silence. A goat wanders through the courtyard, momentarily disrupting a careful line of shadows. A scribe waves it off, muttering about distractions and divine interference. Fringe interpretations suggest that such interruptions could have been read as subtle omens, minor yet significant deviations in the careful order of shadows. Historians still argue whether these interruptions were seen as meaningful signals or merely inconsequential nuisances. You chuckle at the notion of a goat unknowingly influencing the timing of sacred rituals, a furry agent of chaos in an otherwise orderly world. The tallest stick casts a shadow that intersects several smaller, previously marked points. A priest consults a clay tablet to confirm alignment. Fringe theories propose that these intersections might have served multiple purposes, from coordinating ceremonies to predicting agricultural cycles. Historians still debate the intentionality behind these alignments, weighing practicality against ritual significance. You trace the lattice of shadows with your gaze, recognizing the quiet intelligence in their arrangement, the meticulous calibration that blends human ingenuity with natural patterns. The breeze carries the faint aroma of papyrus and warm earth, mixing with the subtle scent of the sun-baked sand. You pause to watch a bird soar overhead, its shadow briefly joining the intricate dance of lines on the ground. Fringe historians suggest that daily shadow tracking could have functioned as both a practical and contemplative practice, guiding schedules while also fostering meditative awareness. Historians still argue how intentionally these dual purposes were integrated into Egyptian culture. You close your eyes briefly, letting the rhythmic stretch and shift of shadows calm your mind. A scribe adjusts the position of a low stick, carefully realigning it with a previously marked point. An apprentice records the shadow's tip with charcoal on a small tablet. Fringe interpretations suggest this meticulous documentation represents early attempts at error correction, acknowledging that accurate observation requires both attention and recording. Historians still debate whether such practices influenced later developments in Egyptian mathematics and astronomy. You imagine the quiet concentration, the repeated small gestures, a human effort to bring order to the celestial rhythm. Across the courtyard, a semicircle of short sticks casts overlapping shadows, forming intricate patterns. A priest adjusts a single stick, murmuring softly, as if negotiating with the sun itself. Fringe historians propose that these patterns may have carried symbolic meaning, subtly indicating times for prayers, offerings, or communal tasks. Historians still argue whether symbolic intent or practical measurement predominated in daily shadow work. You feel a gentle sense of connection to a world where the movement of light is both functional and sacred. The sun continues its descent, and shadows stretch farther, their edges blurring in the warm, diffused light. You watch an apprentice trace an intersecting line on a tablet, the tip of a shadow captured precisely for posterity. Fringe interpretations suggest these records may have informed festival timings, agricultural planning, or even judicial proceedings, embedding temporal awareness into societal routines. Historians still debate the extent to which shadow observation structured Egyptian civic and religious life. A small stick's shadow drifts over a faint notch in the sand, carefully noted by a priest. Fringe historians propose that such notches may have served as markers of both mundane and sacred significance, bridging the passage of hours with ritual observance. Historians still argue whether the use of notches was standardized or idiosyncratic across temples. You trace the delicate pattern with your eyes, sensing the patient thought invested in each small mark. You walk past the tallest stick, its shadow now nearly touching the far wall. Priests and apprentices move slowly, deliberately, with synchronized care. Fringe theories suggest that this rhythm of observation instilled discipline, patience, and attentiveness, skills essential for both ritual and practical life. Historians still debate whether this was an intentional method of moral training or merely a functional requirement of timekeeping. You can feel the meditative cadence in every gesture, the harmony of human action and solar movement. Nearby, a goat steps lightly across the courtyard, its shadow fleeting over the sand. A scribe mutters, half in jest, about divine distractions. Fringe interpretations suggest that animals and other small disruptions were sometimes read as omens, playful or serious, influencing interpretations of shadow measurements. Historians still argue how seriously such readings were taken. You smile at the notion, appreciating the subtle interplay of order and chaos. The semicircle of sticks now casts a complex network of shadows, each line noted and recorded. A priest leans over, adjusting one shadow tip against a tablet, while an apprentice notes the correction. Fringe historians suggest these adjustments exemplify early observational rigor, blending ritual, education, and scientific curiosity. Historians still debate the degree to which these practices influence the development of Egyptian mathematics. As the sun approaches the horizon, shadows lengthen dramatically, merging into softer, elongated forms. You probably sigh quietly, realizing that the day's careful observations are almost complete, yet the rhythm continues, perpetual, cyclical, and mesmerizing. The courtyard hums with silent activity, the soft scratching of charcoal, the gentle shifting of sticks, the occasional coo of a distant bird, all orchestrated by the slow, inevitable movement of sunlight. Twilight settles over the courtyard, a mellow wash of rose and indigo softening every edge. You trudge along the sun-warmed sand, feeling it shift and compress beneath your feet, each step releasing a faint puff of dust that catches the last golden rays. The shadows now stretch long, delicate fingers, reaching toward the western walls, merging, splitting, and overlapping in a slow, mesmerizing dance. You probably won't survive watching every subtle movement in real time, but there's a soothing rhythm here, like the heartbeat of the day itself, measured not in hours, but in inches of shadow sliding across the sand. A priest kneels beside a set of short sticks, gently nudging one into perfect alignment with the faint, worn marks of previous days. Fringe interpretations suggest that the meticulous alignment of multiple sticks may have been used to track more than just hours. It could have provided clues about seasonal shifts, solstices, and the timing of agricultural work. Historians still argue whether the sophistication of these methods was uniform across Egypt or varied from temple to temple. You imagine generations of scribes and priests, their hands carefully tracing the ephemeral lines, calibrating human routines to celestial motions with patient dedication. A young apprentice crouches, marking the tip of a shadow on a clay tablet with charcoal, his tiny fingers smudging slightly with each careful movement. Fringe theories propose that these exercises not only taught patience, but may have fostered early numeracy and spatial reasoning skills, a hidden education embedded in everyday labor. Historians still debate whether such dual-purpose training was intentional or an accidental byproduct of repetitive practice. You grin softly, picturing the apprentice's concentration, the quiet satisfaction of aligning shadows with precision, the tactile sensation of clay and charcoal under his hands. The tallest stick's shadow now forms an elegant diagonal across the courtyard, intersecting several smaller stick shadows that fan outward like spokes of a wheel. A priest consults a tablet, confirming alignments and making subtle adjustments. Fringe interpretations suggest that these intersecting points could have been early methods of predicting astronomical events, or even tracking lunar phases. Historians still argue whether these practical observations were systematically recorded for future use or remained ephemeral daily tasks. You watch the lattice of shadows, recognizing the blend of utility, discipline, and artistry in the careful calibration of light. Nearby, a small goat scampers across the courtyard, its shadow briefly colliding with the precise lines of the sticks. A scribe waves it away with mild exasperation, muttering about the divine humor of animals. Fringe historians propose that such disruptions were sometimes interpreted as minor omens, playful interruptions in a carefully ordered system. Historians still debate the seriousness with which these incidental events were treated. You chuckle quietly, imagining a goat as an unintentional participant in sacred temporal calculations. A semicircle of short sticks casts overlapping shadows, forming subtle geometric patterns on the sand. An apprentice kneels, adjusting one stick so that its shadow aligns perfectly with a previously recorded point. Fringe theories suggest that these patterns may have served multiple functions, from practical timekeeping to symbolic or ritualistic purposes, possibly representing cosmological diagrams or early forms of mapping. Historians still argue whether symbolic meaning or practical necessity predominated. You lean back on the warm ground, savoring the sense of meticulous care, a meditative connection between human action and natural phenomena. The wind carries the faint scent of river mud and baked clay. You watch the shadows shift imperceptibly, merging and splitting in a silent, ongoing choreography. Fringe interpretations suggest that priests may have used this time for reflection, combining observation with meditation, cultivating mindfulness alongside precise measurement. Historians still debate how consciously these dual purposes were integrated. You close your eyes for a brief moment, letting the rhythmic movement of shadows and gentle evening breeze lull your mind. Across the courtyard, a scribe traces intersecting shadows with charcoal, pausing occasionally to consult a small clay tablet. Fringe historians propose that these exercises may have cultivated early scientific thinking, observation, measurement, correction, and record-keeping. Historians still argue whether these practices directly influenced Egyptian mathematics or astronomy. You imagine the quiet satisfaction of both priest and apprentice, each line traced in careful attention. Each mark connecting earthly duties with the celestial clock above. The semicircle of sticks casts intricate overlapping patterns, forming a transient lattice across the sand. A priest adjusts a single stick with reverent care. Fringe interpretations suggest that the patterns could have indicated precise moments for rituals or communal activities. Historians still debate whether the markings served ceremonial or functional purposes, or perhaps both. You lean against a cool stone wall, watching the interplay of light, shadow, and human intention unfold quietly, harmoniously. The tallest stick's shadow now stretches almost to the far wall, forming a delicate diagonal that intersects with smaller shadows, forming a subtle geometric network. An apprentice marks the intersection with charcoal, documenting this fleeting alignment. Fringe theories propose that such careful recording may have assisted in anticipating seasonal changes, solstices, or other temporal markers, critical for agriculture and religious observance. Historians still argue the extent of this predictive use. You take a deep breath, appreciating the combination of patient observation, skill, and quiet devotion embedded in these daily practices. Nearby, birds flit overhead, casting ephemeral shadows that briefly overlay the meticulously arranged stick shadows. Fringe interpretations suggest that such natural interferences were sometimes seen as symbolic, perhaps messages or subtle guidance from the environment. Historians still debate the weight given to these interpretations. You smile at the thought, recognizing the delicate balance between order and unpredictability, human diligence, and nature's playful interruptions. The courtyard feels hushed, the air carrying the soft warmth of lingering sunlight. Shadows now fade gradually, their edges softening as the sun nears the horizon. Priests and apprentices work with a calm, deliberate rhythm, marking points, adjusting sticks, and recording observations in an unhurried, meditative cadence. Fringe historians propose that this careful attentiveness may have been as much about mental discipline and spiritual focus as about temporal measurement. Historians still debate the relative importance of ritual versus practical outcomes. A short stick's shadow drifts toward a faint notch in the sand. A priest marks the tip and consults a tablet. Fringe theories suggest these minor notches may have served as precise reference points for timing rituals, signaling breaks, or coordinating labor schedules. Historians still argue whether the system was standardized across temples or localized. You watch quietly, sensing the deep interconnection between human activity, celestial patterns, and the passing of hours. As the sun dips lower, the shadows stretch and soften, moving imperceptibly across the courtyard's worn sand. The careful alignment of sticks, the marking of tips, and the overlapping lattices now seem almost like an orchestrated meditation, a dance between light and human precision. Fringe historians propose that these practices may have shaped not only timekeeping, but also broader aspects of Egyptian social and spiritual life. Historians still debate the full range of influence. You inhale the warm, dusty air, feeling a serene connection to these patient, deliberate observers of the sun. Finally, the sun touches the horizon, casting the courtyard into a soft twilight. Shadows merge into elongated forms, the interplay of light and human attention settling into quiet harmony. You probably take a moment to appreciate the rhythm of patience, the tactile satisfaction of marking points, and the subtle guidance of celestial motion. A gentle calm settles over the courtyard, a quiet bridge between human diligence and the eternal movement of the sun. Night approaches slowly, the sky transitioning from soft twilight into deep, velvety indigo. You trudge across the courtyard one last time, feeling the sand cool beneath your feet, the heat of the day dissipating into gentle evening air. Shadows are now long, merged into a muted grey, their crisp lines blurred by fading sunlight. You probably won't notice every subtle nuance unless you've followed the day's patient procession of shadow tips. The meticulous calibration of stick after stick. But there's a strange comfort in this slow dissolution, a quiet reminder of the impermanence of each passing hour. The priests gather near the semicircle of short sticks, making final adjustments and recording the last visible lines on clay tablets. Fringe historians suggest that these final evening observations may have been crucial, not just for marking the end of daylight, but also for predicting nighttime rituals or setting the schedule for early morning tasks. Historians still argue whether sunset measurements were as valued as those at high noon or sunrise. You lean against a cool stone wall, watching as delicate movements, small nudges of sticks, careful charcoal marks, reflect a rhythm as old as human curiosity. A young apprentice kneels, carefully aligning a low stick's shadow with a faint notch in the sand. Fringe theories propose that evening alignment exercises were designed to train observational skills and discipline, almost like a meditative practice. Historians still debate whether such dual-purpose methods were intentional or simply emerged naturally from daily routines. You smile softly, imagining the apprentice's focused hands, tracing the tip of a shadow, feeling both the texture of sand and the weight of tradition. The tallest stick casts a stretched shadow across the courtyard, intersecting previously marked points like spokes on a slowly rotating wheel. A priest consults a tablet, confirming the day's observations. Fringe interpretations suggest that these intersection points could have served as markers for significant celestial events, agricultural cycles, or ceremonial times. Historians still argue whether these records were preserved for long-term use or primarily served daily ritual needs. You watch the lattice of shadows, appreciating the balance of human precision and natural inevitability. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying the faint scent of papyrus and the cooling warmth of the day's sun. Birds roost on nearby walls, their shadows fleeting over the remaining stick lines, creating momentary patterns that merge with the established network. Fringe historians propose that these natural interruptions were sometimes interpreted symbolically, perhaps as subtle messages from the environment. Historians still debate the significance attributed to such events. You chuckle quietly, picturing a pigeon inadvertently influencing sacred temporal measurements. The semicircle of sticks now casts soft, overlapping shadows, forming a lattice that seems to pulse gently in the dimming light. An apprentice traces a few last shadow tips with charcoal, ensuring that every mark aligns with recorded patterns. Fringe interpretations suggest this final act could have functioned as both practical timekeeping and a reflective exercise, a merging of discipline, meditation, and scientific inquiry. Historians still argue whether this dual purpose was explicitly recognized or merely coincidental. You sense the calm focus, the quiet dedication that has sustained these routines for generations. Nearby, a goat wanders lazily through the courtyard, stepping over the sand's delicate marks. A scribe shakes his head with a bemused grin, muttering about divine humor or earthly distraction. Fringe theories propose that such minor disruptions might have been recorded as symbolic annotations, small notes in an otherwise meticulous log. Historians still debate whether these observations held ritual or practical significance. You laugh softly, appreciating the contrast of order and chaos, human effort and animal caprice. The tallest stick's shadow stretches nearly to the far wall, forming a delicate, elongated triangle intersecting smaller shadows in a complex yet elegant pattern. A priest crouches to mark the intersection on a clay tablet. Fringe interpretations suggest these carefully preserved points may have informed ritual timing, civil administration, or agricultural planning. Historians still argue the degree to which temporal precision guided everyday life versus ceremonial observances. You trace the shadows with your eyes, appreciating the slow, deliberate interplay of human intention and celestial motion. A semicircle of short sticks now forms a subtle, intricate pattern, illuminated faintly by the residual glow of the setting sun. An apprentice checks each stick, confirming alignment and recording any discrepancies. Fringe historians suggest these patterns may have been designed to train observational skills, promote patience, and subtly guide ritual consciousness. Historians still debate the extent to which these practices influenced Egyptian education and religious discipline. You pause, feeling a meditative calm in the quiet dedication of repeated, attentive gestures. The priests rise, their final charcoal marks made, and step back to survey the courtyard. Fringe interpretations suggest that these evening observations might have been moments of reflection, a way to align human action with celestial cycles, fostering both practical awareness and contemplative focus. Historians still argue whether this reflection was ritualized or incidental. You watch silently, sensing the quiet satisfaction of a day's work completed, each shadow tip captured with precision and care. Nearby, a small bird flits across the courtyard, casting an ephemeral shadow that dances over the meticulously arranged sticks. Fringe historians propose that these fleeting interactions may have been seen as omens or subtle messages. Historians still debate the cultural weight given to such observations. You smile, appreciating the harmony of deliberate human action and spontaneous natural events. The tallest stick's shadow merges with smaller shadows, forming a soft, complex network across the sand. Priests make final adjustments, consulting tablets and murmuring quietly. Fringe interpretations suggest that these twilight routines may have reinforced social and spiritual cohesion, integrating practical timekeeping with meditative practice. Historians still argue whether such integration was consciously designed or a natural consequence of repeated practice. You feel a deep appreciation for the patience and care woven into every movement. A final check ensures all shadow tips align with previously recorded marks. Apprentices pause, noticing the courtyard bathed in the faint glow of the setting sun, the sand cool beneath their knees. Fringe historians suggest that these concluding observations may have been both practical and symbolic, signaling the end of daily labor and the onset of rest. Historians still debate how codified these rituals were across different regions. You lean back, savoring the quiet completion of meticulous work, the courtyard now suspended in evening stillness. The courtyard is hushed, shadows softened into gentle gradients, the last residual sunlight flickering across sticks and sand. You probably feel a sense of calm, a meditative satisfaction from witnessing the rhythm of human patience aligned with the movement of the sun. Fringe historians propose that these twilight routines may have shaped not only practical schedules, but also social and spiritual cohesion. Historians still debate the full extent of influence. You inhale the cool evening air, letting the day's slow cadence of observation ease into your mind. Finally, darkness edges closer, blending shadow and stick into subtle silhouettes. The courtyard hums softly with the quiet presence of priests, apprentices, and the lingering scent of sun-warmed sand. You trudge slowly toward the exit, the tactile memory of sand, sticks, and meticulous charcoal marks lingering in your mind. Fringe historians suggest that this daily engagement with shadow, light, and rhythm may have nurtured both practical wisdom and reflective thought. Historians still debate the balance between functional and ceremonial significance. You take one last look at the lattice of shadows, feeling the gentle pull of human diligence harmonizing with celestial order. The night has deepened now, and the courtyard is bathed in silvery moonlight, the cool glow transforming familiar forms into something quietly mysterious. You trudge along the edge of the semicircle of sticks, feeling the subtle chill of sand that has cooled from the day's heat, each step sinking slightly, giving a soft, satisfying crunch underfoot. You probably won't survive paying attention to every faint shadow the moon casts against the sticks, but there's a hypnotic rhythm here, a gentle interplay of light and dark that invites a kind of meditative wandering through time itself. A priest leans over the tallest stick, observing how the moonlight casts a faint but precise shadow across previously marked points. Fringe historians suggest that lunar observations may have been used to supplement solar shadow measurements, perhaps to refine calendars or signal important ritual dates. Historians still argue whether nighttime alignments were standardized practice or the improvisation of particularly observant individuals. You imagine the priest's quiet concentration, eyes tracing subtle arcs of shadow, hands poised but still, caught between the patience of a scholar and the reverence of a spiritual observer. A young apprentice kneels nearby, charcoal in hand, making small marks where faint moon shadows meet the sand. Fringe theories suggest that such nocturnal exercises were partly educational, cultivating a sense of precision and attentiveness even when the visual cues were less pronounced. Historians still debate whether nighttime practice was routine or a rare opportunity for advanced apprentices. You smile at the thought of tiny hands fumbling with charcoal, tracing shadows that are almost ghostly, learning the delicate balance between light, time, and human diligence. Across the courtyard, a semicircle of shorter sticks forms soft, overlapping shadows in the moonlight, creating subtle patterns that shift slowly as the earth rotates. Fringe interpretations suggest that these patterns may have been used for predictive purposes, anticipating seasonal shifts, agricultural cycles, or ritual observances. Historians still argue whether such predictive use was systematic or opportunistic. You lean against a cool stone wall, eyes half closed, appreciating the quiet beauty of shadows, moving with imperceptible slowness. A tactile lesson in patience and observation. Nearby, a small bird rustles in the nearby palm, its shadow briefly intersecting with the stick lattice. Fringe theories propose that these fleeting natural events may have been read symbolically, perhaps interpreted as minor signs or omens. Historians still debate the cultural weight given to such occurrences. You chuckle softly, imagining the bird as an unintentional participant in sacred observations, a tiny trickster, complicating the painstaking precision of human effort. The tallest stick now casts a faint diagonal shadow across the sand, intersecting the smaller stick shadows in a delicate lattice. A priest carefully notes the point where the moonlight shadow meets a previously marked line. Fringe interpretations suggest that these intersections may have guided ceremonial timing or indicated optimal moments for agricultural tasks, like the nocturnal watering of plants near temple gardens. Historians still debate whether these nocturnal marks were widely utilized or merely practiced in select observatories. You follow the lines with your eyes, appreciating the harmonious dance of light, shadow, and human intention. A goat wanders lazily through the courtyard, its shadow briefly crossing the marked points, leaving you momentarily distracted. Fringe historians suggest such disruptions could have been interpreted symbolically, perhaps signaling small divine interventions or playful reminders of human limitations. Historians still argue about the degree to which animals were integrated into symbolic or temporal systems. You grin quietly, imagining an amused priest shaking his head as the goat inadvertently participates in the lunar shadow ritual. The semicircle of short sticks forms overlapping arcs, soft in the moonlight, creating subtle geometrical patterns across the sand. Fringe theories propose that these configurations may have been used for educational purposes, teaching apprentices spatial reasoning and coordination, while connecting them to the larger cycles of nature. Historians still debate whether these practices were part of formalized instruction or informal apprenticeship learning. You watch silently, appreciating the quiet rigor, the almost meditative repetition, and the careful calibration of each stick's position. Across the courtyard, a scribe crouches, making faint marks with charcoal, noting the minor shifts of shadow over time. Fringe interpretations suggest that the meticulous record-keeping may have formed early models for Egyptian numeracy, mapping solar and lunar movements onto practical calendars. Historians still argue about the extent to which these observations directly informed broader mathematical development. You lean back on the sand, taking in the rhythmic, almost musical motion of the shadows and scribal gestures, sensing the blend of practicality and contemplative reflection. The tallest stick's moonlit shadow now merges with several smaller shadows, forming a delicate network across the courtyard. Priests make final adjustments, murmuring softly, checking alignment. Fringe historians propose that these twilight and nocturnal observations reinforced social cohesion, integrating timekeeping, ritual awareness, and education into a harmonious whole. Historians still debate whether such integration was intentional or emerged naturally from repeated practice. You inhale deeply, feeling the evening air cool your lungs, the soft scent of sand and papyrus mingling in a quietly sacred aroma. Nearby, a bird briefly perches atop a wall, casting a fleeting shadow across the lattice of sticks. Fringe interpretations suggest that these small, transient events may have been perceived as symbolic messages or environmental cues. Historians still argue about the interpretive significance assigned to such moments. You smile at the idea of nature quietly participating in human systems, an unscripted, subtle dialogue between creature, human, and celestial order. The semicircle of sticks now forms intricate, overlapping shadow patterns, soft and ephemeral in the silver light. Apprentices pause to ensure every alignment is recorded accurately. Fringe historians propose that the act of observing and documenting shadows under dim moonlight was both a practical necessity and a meditative exercise, nurturing focus and patience. Historians still debate whether these nightly routines had consistent instructional purposes. You feel a quiet reverence for the laborious dedication, the merging of skill, observation, and a sense of cosmic rhythm. A priest kneels beside the tallest stick, marking the final intersection point on a clay tablet. Fringe theories suggest these moonlight alignments may have assisted in refining timekeeping systems, possibly contributing to early understanding of lunar cycles. Historians still argue about the scope and intentionality of this knowledge application. You watch in quiet fascination, recognizing the patient work as both deeply practical and subtly spiritual. The courtyard grows hushed, shadows blending into gentle gradients, the lunar light softening every form. The apprentices and priests finish their nightly checks, moving with deliberate calm, their actions synchronized with the slow, imperceptible shift of the moon's position. Fringe historians suggest that these routines fostered not just temporal awareness, but mindfulness, discipline, and social cohesion. Historians still debate whether these outcomes were consciously intended. You trudge slowly across the cool sand, absorbing the quiet satisfaction of a day's work completed in harmony with celestial rhythms. Finally, the courtyard rests under a calm night sky, shadows elongated, subtle, almost ghostly. You probably pause to feel the serene satisfaction of observation, reflection, and patience, the slow passage of time traced in charcoal marks and sand impressions. Fringe historians propose that this nocturnal engagement nurtured both practical wisdom and contemplative insight. Historians still debate how far-reaching these effects were. You take a deep, steadying breath, letting the soft moonlight and the gentle cadence of shadows ease your mind. The courtyard is now enveloped in deep night, the moon climbing higher, its light cooler, more ethereal, casting elongated shadows that stretch far beyond the semicircle of sticks. You trudge slowly along the edge of the courtyard, sand soft beneath your feet, and you probably won't notice that each stick's shadow seems to shimmer faintly, as if whispering the passage of time in a secret language only the patient could read. The air carries the residual warmth of the day, mixing with the subtle aroma of papyrus, lotus, and the faint tang of sun-baked clay, a sensory cocktail that seems to slow the world down. A priest moves deliberately, leaning over the tallest stick, tracing its faint shadow with care. Fringe historians suggest that nocturnal observations were occasionally employed to refine solar shadow techniques, especially during periods when the sun's path was less predictable due to seasonal anomalies. Historians still argue whether nighttime measurements were a routine part of timekeeping or experimental, exploratory practices for particularly meticulous scholars. You notice the subtle tilt of his head, the way his eyes follow the imperceptible movement of shadow, and you can't help but admire the patience required to perform such delicate work. Nearby, a young apprentice crouches low, charcoal in hand, making precise marks on the sand where faint shadow tips intersect previously noted points. Fringe theories propose that this act served dual purposes: practical recording of lunar-assisted shadow positions and a meditative exercise in attention, coordination, and endurance. Historians still debate whether these nocturnal routines were formally codified or simply emerged organically in temple training. You imagine the apprentice's fingers leaving fine, dark trails across soft sand, each mark a testament to human curiosity and quiet diligence. Across the courtyard, short sticks form gentle, overlapping arcs under the moonlight, creating an intricate lattice of shadows that shifts slowly as the earth continues its subtle rotation. Fringe interpretations suggest that this lattice may have had predictive applications, perhaps indicating optimal planting periods or times for sacred rituals. Historians still argue whether such predictive functions were systematically applied or limited to select observatories. You lean against a stone wall, appreciating the elegance of geometry, born of sunlight and moonlight alike, a reminder of the Egyptians' keen observation of natural cycles. A goat wanders lazily across the courtyard, momentarily crossing the shadow lattice and leaving faint paw impressions in the sand. Fringe historians propose that these minor disruptions might have been interpreted symbolically, as small but meaningful deviations, perhaps omens or playful reminders of human fallibility. Historians still debate the cultural or practical significance assigned to such events. You chuckle softly, picturing a bemused priest shaking his head at the goat's inadvertent contribution to celestial measurements. The tallest stick casts a long, delicate shadow, intersecting multiple shorter shadows, forming a soft, intricate web on the cool sand. A priest crouches to record these intersections carefully, consulting clay tablets and whispering the day's final notes to himself. Fringe interpretations suggest that these intersections might have served as alignment markers, subtly guiding both agricultural planning and ceremonial timing. Historians still argue whether such observations were integral to broader administrative practices or remained localized ritual exercises. You watch silently, mesmerized by the patient rhythm, the fusion of human intent and natural law. Nearby, a scribe kneels, noting the faintest adjustments in shadow positions, hands steady, eyes narrowed. Fringe theories suggest that meticulous record-keeping during these nocturnal sessions may have contributed to early understandings of geometry, numeracy, and spatial reasoning in Egyptian culture. Historians still debate the extent to which this knowledge diffused beyond temple walls into wider civic or agricultural planning. You breathe slowly, sensing the quiet power of small, deliberate actions compounded over generations. The semicircle of sticks seems almost alive in the moonlight, a lattice pulsing gently with the slow, measured movement of shadows. Fringe historians propose that this visual rhythm may have functioned as both meditation and instruction, training novices to perceive subtle variations and anticipate changes, building mental acuity alongside practical skills. Historians still argue whether this dual-purpose effect was intentional or an emergent property of repeated practice. You follow the lines with your eyes, enjoying the hypnotic effect, a gentle lull of geometry and patience unfolding before you. Across the courtyard, a small bird flits briefly over the lattice, casting ephemeral shadows that intersect the carefully plotted lines. Fringe interpretations suggest that such fleeting occurrences may have been read symbolically or even humorously noted in observational records. Historians still debate whether these natural interruptions held any measurable ritual significance. You grin, imagining a scribal note. Bird touches the sacred shadow, day slightly unsettled. The tallest stick now stands sentinel, shadow stretching diagonally, tracing a precise yet ephemeral path across the sand. Priests confer softly, ensuring that every recorded point matches the night's observations. Fringe historians suggest that these nocturnal checks reinforced a sense of continuity, connecting successive days and apprentices in a shared temporal framework. Historians still debate whether the emphasis was on exactitude, ritual, or both. You feel the quiet tension of diligence, the satisfaction of human order harmonizing with natural rhythm. Nearby, a small circle of apprentices make final adjustments, tracing shadows with charcoal and ensuring intersections are properly documented. Fringe interpretations suggest that these actions served as both practical timekeeping and a subtle form of mental discipline, fostering concentration and patience under challenging, low-light conditions. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal exercises were universally applied or reserved for advanced practitioners. You watch, half mesmerized, half lulled, feeling the cadence of meticulous labor calm your own thoughts. The semicircle of sticks forms soft, overlapping shadows that shift imperceptibly as the night progresses. A priest rises, inspecting the lattice from a low vantage point, ensuring that every alignment conforms to expectation. Fringe historians propose that these careful nightly routines not only reinforced temporal precision, but also instilled a meditative awareness of nature's rhythms. Historians still debate the extent to which such spiritual or cognitive effects were deliberately cultivated. You notice the calm, almost ritualized gestures, sensing an undercurrent of reverence in otherwise methodical practice. Across the courtyard, the lattice of shadow intersections now forms a complex yet elegant pattern, a visual symphony of line and light. Fringe interpretations suggest that such nocturnal patterns may have been early prototypes for more sophisticated calendrical or astronomical systems, bridging practical observation with abstract representation. Historians still argue about the degree of foresight applied to these nocturnal alignments. You trace the arcs gently with your eyes, marveling at the centuries of observation embedded in seemingly simple sticks and sand. The courtyard grows increasingly quiet, nocturnal animals retreat, the breeze softens, and moonlight bathes the shadow lattice in a calming silver glow. Fringe historians propose that the final nocturnal observations may have served as a form of communal meditation, integrating practical measurement, apprenticeship, and contemplative reflection. Historians still debate whether such interpretations reflect intentional design or later retrospective analysis. You inhale deeply, feeling the stillness of the night, the rhythmic cadence of shadow and observation settling over your mind. Finally, the tallest stick's shadow merges with smaller shadows to form a serene, stable network across the sand. Priests and apprentices make their last notes, rise slowly, and begin to disperse into the quiet night. Fringe interpretations suggest that the gentle culmination of nocturnal measurements may have created a subtle sense of temporal and social cohesion. Historians still argue about the long-term cultural impact of these evening practices. You linger for a moment, letting the soft moonlight, the lattice of shadows, and the patient human effort wash over you, a gentle meditation on time, patience, and the enduring curiosity of humankind. The first hints of pre-dawn light begin to stretch across the horizon, softening the edges of the courtyard and lending a pale gold wash to the sand where shadows once ruled. You trudge slowly among the semicircle of sticks, noticing how the faint silhouettes cast by the emerging sun replace the delicate lunar lattice with a sturdier, warmer geometry. You probably won't care, but there's something quietly hypnotic in watching shadows shift from silver to gold, a slow reminder that the sun has always been the true clockmaker. A priest moves deliberately to the tallest stick, brushing away residual sand and tracing the morning shadow with a practiced hand. Fringe historians propose that the precise observation of dawn shadows helped standardize early Egyptian calendars, integrating celestial patterns with practical agricultural planning. Historians still argue whether such refinements were widespread or confined to temple observatories. You watch as his fingers hover near faint marks, the action almost ritualistic, a blend of devotion, science, and careful attention. Nearby, an apprentice traces the shadow of a shorter stick with charcoal, marking intersections that indicate the sun's early position. Fringe theories suggest that these morning observations were partly intended as teaching exercises, cultivating precision and attentiveness. Historians still debate whether the pedagogical aspect was deliberate or simply a beneficial side effect. You smile at the apprentice's concentration, imagining how repetitive motion and acute observation might have honed both skill and patience. Across the courtyard, overlapping shadow patterns begin to coalesce into subtle triangles and arcs as the sun climbs, forming a clear, measurable lattice across the sand. Fringe interpretations suggest that these geometrical patterns provided early methods to estimate time intervals or predict seasonal shifts. Historians still argue whether these patterns were applied with mathematical rigor or remained more intuitive and observational. You take a quiet breath, feeling the symmetry and order of shadows soothe your mind, as if each line carries the slow pulse of ancient wisdom. A small bird flits across the courtyard, briefly intersecting the lattice. Fringe historians propose that such fleeting natural interactions were often observed, recorded, or even interpreted symbolically, signaling changes in daily routines or environmental cues. Historians still debate the significance assigned to these minor events. You chuckle softly, picturing a scribe jotting down a bird's shadow in the margins of a tablet, noting the unexpected participation of the natural world in human observation. The tallest stick casts a shadow stretching diagonally across the semicircle, intersecting multiple smaller shadows and forming a soft, intricate web on the sand. Priests consult tablets and murmur quietly, comparing the morning alignment with prior lunar and solar observations. Fringe interpretations suggest that the cumulative data helped refine predictive calendars and informed rituals. Historians still argue about the degree to which these observations impacted broader societal planning. You trace the intersections with your eyes, marveling at the careful interplay of human curiosity and celestial mechanics. Nearby, a scribe kneels, noting subtle adjustments in shadow positions. Fringe theories suggest that meticulous record-keeping was a foundational exercise for developing early numeracy and spatial reasoning. Historians still debate how broadly such knowledge was applied beyond temple contexts. You feel a quiet reverence for these small acts of documentation, recognizing how patience and careful observation have echoed through the centuries. The semicircle of sticks, bathed now in warm sunlight, displays a complex lattice of shadows, arcs, and points, each one a temporal signpost. Fringe historians propose that these visual cues served multiple purposes: educational, ceremonial, and practical. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians consciously engineered these systems for multifaceted utility, or if overlapping benefits emerged naturally. You follow the patterns with a sleepy fascination, appreciating how geometry, light, and human curiosity interweave seamlessly. Across the courtyard, apprentices make final notations, ensuring that morning measurements correspond with previous observations. Fringe interpretations suggest that this repetition fostered social cohesion and disciplined attention, blending learning, ritual, and a subtle sense of communal purpose. Historians still debate whether such cultural reinforcement was intentional. You breathe in the cool morning air, sensing the quiet satisfaction of human effort harmonizing with celestial rhythms. A goat wanders once more across the sand, its shadow briefly joining the lattice. Fringe historians propose that such interactions were occasionally noted for amusement or symbolic interpretation, a gentle reminder of nature's unpredictability. Historians still debate the significance of these incidental events. You grin, picturing the priest suppressing a laugh at the goat's unintentional participation in sacred measurements. The courtyard settles into a tranquil rhythm as the sun climbs higher. Shadows shorten, overlap, and stretch, forming a dynamic, living tapestry across the sand. Fringe interpretations suggest that the evolving shadow patterns created an experiential learning environment, teaching both novices and seasoned observers about time, motion, and the interconnectedness of celestial and terrestrial rhythms. Historians still argue about the intentionality of this immersive design. You feel the slow, meditative cadence of observation, each moment a gentle beat in an ancient, ongoing rhythm. Nearby, a priest kneels to compare the morning shadow alignments to lunar nighttime data, making careful annotations. Fringe theories suggest that this cross-referencing may have aided in predicting seasonal changes, guiding agricultural and ritualistic planning. Historians still debate how precise or widespread these techniques were. You watch quietly, sensing the blend of science and devotion, an intricate tapestry of observation, patience, and human ingenuity. The semicircle of sticks now glows under the growing sunlight, the lattice of shadows forming a precise and visually satisfying network. Fringe historians propose that the visual harmony itself was pedagogical, fostering attentiveness, pattern recognition, and an appreciation for natural order. Historians still argue whether aesthetic considerations played a role or were merely incidental. You pause to absorb the symmetry, the soft clink of distant temple instruments mingling with birdsong, a gentle soundtrack to centuries-old wisdom. Finally, the courtyard rests fully bathed in morning light, shadows minimized, sticks aligned, and observations complete. Priests and apprentices disperse slowly, leaving behind a serene, ordered space where light, shadow, and human diligence intersect. Fringe interpretations suggest that this daily ritual harmonized social, educational, and temporal awareness. Historians still debate the long-term cultural and cognitive impacts. You linger, taking in the quiet satisfaction, the delicate balance of observation, patience, and cosmic rhythm, a gentle, enduring testament to human curiosity and meticulous care. The sun now rises fully, softening the courtyard with a warm, steady glow that gently dissipates the last shadows from the semicircle of sticks. You breathe in slowly, feeling the cool traces of night fade and the gentle heat of morning settle over your shoulders. The sand beneath your feet is smooth and warm, and even the faint aroma of papyrus and lotus seems gentler now, less sharp, more like a quiet sigh across the centuries. You probably won't notice it at first, but the world seems to stretch, expand, and yawn with you. A subtle invitation to let tension ease from your limbs. Priests and apprentices have departed, leaving behind only the soft traces of footprints and faint charcoal marks in the sand, a silent map of diligence, curiosity, and careful observation. Fringe historians suggest that these subtle remnants, the fleeting shadows, the delicate arcs, carry echoes of human patience and wonder, tiny whispers of the past that linger long after the observers have gone. Historians still argue how much of this meticulous practice influenced broader cultural or scientific development, but for now, that uncertainty is comforting, like a gentle puzzle left for your mind to ponder as it unwinds. You let your eyes follow the courtyard's geometry one last time, noticing the semicircle of sticks standing quietly, no longer measuring, no longer shifting, but holding the memory of countless sunrises and sunsets. The lattice of shadows, once dynamic, now rests in quiet anticipation of the next day, and you can feel a slow calm settling over your thoughts, softening the edges of worry, curiosity, and fatigue alike. Take a deep breath. The morning air is smooth and warm, carrying a sense of continuity, of rhythm, and of human perseverance that is at once ancient and intimately familiar. You let yourself drift alongside that cadence, slowly, gently, as if carried on the shadowed trails of time itself. And finally, you let your eyelids grow heavy, your mind slow, your body sink into the comforting quiet of existence, observed and remembered.